they put this gravel drive in because you couldn't landlock the cemetery. The original entrance to the cemetery came off of the old road all the way up back through the woods there. There was 5 of them, one for each corner and one in the center. But if you look here, you see the bolt there coming out of that concrete. That's what they bolted the stringers to for that first building or church that was up here. That was burned, I think probably sometime in the 60s, late 60s. Yeah, so. But here, when we get here, in April, the city decided they wanted to sell it, the cemetery. That's what this is. So they entered into negotiation with the descendants group. And I'll explain who that descendants group is. They formed a 501c3 and negotiation with the city, and that fell down because the city said, we're not giving you any money, you're just going to take it as is. But they did, descendants and the lawyer, we did a media blast and just blasted the hell out of them. You know, Johns Creek voted the #1 city, except you got this scar here. You've had this property for 5 years through eminent domain, and you haven't done a damn thing up here. Other than spend money to put these fences in here. And I complain, well, you're putting fences through the middle of graves, because there's graves all through here. If you see these those banners on those trees, but if you look all the way down, it goes all the way down to the road. That's the property. The concrete that you see there, those were the steps from the cinder block church. That's where that's scattered. Oh, it gets even better. Come on up in here. So after shaming the city and saying that they weren't going to do anything, they did a media blast, and all of a sudden they got religion. They said, okay, we're going to do ground penetrating radar. And they've done, but they haven't completed the mapping. When I make the comment they put fence through the middle of the graves, you see those daffodils coming up there? They planted daffodils around the graves. Well, you don't have to bring flowers every year. Daffodils live 100 years. And they planted them around the grave. And that's a grave right there. There were graves all through here. You see that sign up there? I had a volunteer that built that sign for me. It was an old one back there. He built that for me, and I had him clear. This was all covered with saplings. He cut all this stuff, and he cut it all the way up there, because this did all this before the city got it. And I said, we need to do ground penetrating radar. And I know there are graves here because Kirk Sarkisian, I had him out here, tell me. And he said there were graves all in here. They destroyed all these graves because the developer wanted the property. Oh, it gets even better. So if we come up here, like I said, these are all sapling trees in here and going up through here. But the city does nothing. They don't clean, they dump. So we got layers of leaves and pine straw. And they disputed for years where the cinder block church was. The cinder block church sat right in here. That post you see there is a geomarker. A geodetic service, they map the high point in the land. They're all over Georgia. And there's a marker there. You can come take a look at that. A geodetic survey. And this is the second one. I think they were placed here in 72. But they gave the coordinates for the cinder block church. The cinder block church sat right in here. This is the second marker. And it has an arrow pointing to the first marker. And I got a pole back in there that shows where it is. You see that yellow orange fence there? This is the area where they were getting ready to do construction. This is the area that the developer wanted. So all the headstones that were all up in here, they destroyed them. But the city doing ground penetrating radar, they had to remove some of the sapling trees so they could get that machine up in here. And the guy who was doing the ground penetrating radar, Bigman, asked him to remove some of those sapling trees, and the city got up here, and one of the things we told them not to do was not to disturb the yucca plants. And you can see that's where they cut all the yucca plants down. Now yucca plants are important because yucca plants are historically in black cemetery. They're there around and they're ward off evil. So it's an architectural landmark, and they just cut them. And they don't clear anything. You see these where they had a chipper up here, all that, and then they pile all the trash and broken trees up there in that corner. It gets even worse. You know, my original complaint when I first came up here, there was a two-seater outhouse. Old two-seater outhouse was there. They dropped a tree on it when they were cutting that one of the dead trees, and they dropped that on that two-seater outhouse. But in here, when I first came up here, there's a big hole and a pile of dirt next to it. And some of the folks said that's where they took the body out. They took a body out of here, and they tried to push that and cover that thing up. That's why the ground looks like this, covering that up. So, one of the things I did when I got up here, first thing I did was the story about April Waters. And I listened to them. They wanted to romanticize about there was this slave woman who had a relationship with the slaver, this George Morgan Waters. And I went to a presentation. Then I met the great-great-great-grandson, Madian Saeed. And of course, he knew who his great-great-grandfather was a man. And I found out that the guy had taken that headstone to protect it while they were stealing and destroying others. He took that April Waters headstone. He had it in his garage. And I asked him to return it. And he said, well, you know, because this, that, and the other, they might take it. Finally, I filed a police report and made him bring it back. So April Waters' headstone is back there in the cemetery. And what I also did was, with student leadership, they did a fundraiser for me to repair a lot of the broken headstones that are up here. They were broken in half, and I had a guy I knew who worked at downtown cemetery area, and he knew how to repair these headstones. So we repaired a bunch of these headstones. There is the Historical Society claims that there's probably 114 graves. They're just looking in this area for graves. But one of the perplexing things that they're going to find doing ground penetrating radar, we go up in here and you'll see those yellow flags. That's where they marked and found graves and potential graves. Which is, and I counted probably about 120 of them, those markers. They haven't completed the mapping because they got to mark where they find it, but that's what those yellow flags are. That's where they find the graves. They haven't finished the mapping because they got to do mapping here, this side, and all the way down. Folks didn't know what 2 acres looked like. They thought inside this fence was 2 acres. 2 acres is the end of that green fence, all the way there, to this corner of that green fence there, and going all the way down to that road you drove up. That's 2 acres. And 2 acres goes all the way down to where you can see that shopping center. But there's a discrepancy with the deeds. There's a difference between what the city calls 1.9 acres as opposed to 2.2 acres. And when you overlay the dimensions of looking at the original deed, guess what happens? And I overlay it, guess what happens? It runs, the original property runs through these houses, all the way up to that house there, definitely through that house. So everybody understands that, yeah, there's graves on the other side of that fence. These folks over here put swimming pools up next to the fence, and I'm sure they probably encountered human remains and just kept right on going. So I believe there's graves on the other side of there. But let's go take a look at the headstone for April Waters. Be careful walking here, because there are graves all through here, and you can, since the city doesn't clean any of the pine straw and leaves, it gets kind of soft when you hit some of these depressions, so you got to be careful walking here. But we're walking through, these are graves all here. Now you get a better look at where they haven't finished mapping here. But as I told you before, you can see these daffodils coming up around that grave. Headstone's missing. This is April Waters, and that is his footstone. So the head's here, the foot's there. The only oddity is that most headstones in African American cemetery, the headstones face east. This is the morning sun. And you see some of them here that are facing the west. Don't know why. But this is April Waters' nephew here. And one of the things that people come up here and what they think they see is a bunch of random graves. But the reality is they're not random. If you look north-south, and this is north-south, you can see that these graves are all lined up north-south. When you see a blank space, believe there's a grave there. There's a headstone here. When you look up here, you can see that the graves run this way. They run north and south. All these graves run down here. So how many are here? I told people there's got to be 300 or 400 graves out here. And they only count, New South Associates number was like 114 graves and potential graves. You see that yellow caution tape up there? That's where, because they never cleaned, they had piles of leaves and pine straw. Guess what they did when they're putting the fence in up there and moving equipment? They busted through the concrete cover on those 2 graves. And we believe that's the graves of Herman Owsley, who built that cinder block church. I believe those are him and his wife's grave up here. We have to confirm that. So there's older graves here. I mean, yeah, he was a slave here. April Waters was. And there's another headstone back here, Reuben Chandler. He was a slave here as well on the plantation. But most of the burials are probably up there because, you know, you didn't have, most of these folks just put in the ground without no casket, nothing. You're a slave, you put in the ground. One of the things that they did, and you look at this right here, this is called the temporary concrete marker. People couldn't afford headstones, so the funeral home did this little concrete one here. Yeah, birth of Zachary. And this is what the Girl Scouts did. The Girl Scouts, I think we put, there's like 5 of them were in bad condition. And so we just copied what was on the headstone so it wouldn't be lost. It's concrete. All it's going to do is deteriorate and fall off. There, we did about 5 of them here. There were some that were laying flat on the ground. This place was vandalized. The church was vandalized.